Hello and welcome to the cottage. Today we're talking about herbal teas you can make from wildflowers or even your garden flowers, assuming you're not using toxic chemical sprays on your plants. Real tea is made from leaves of the tea plant, and even with those, you can add all sorts of herbs or spices to trick up the taste. In fact, using dried or fresh fruit or fruit juices can add a hint of sweetness and flavor. Herbal teas, however, don't usually contain tea leaves and are actually not true tea. But these days, the steeping of just about any plant parts in hot water for drinking has come into common usage for the label tea. I started to become interested in edible garden plants because of sites like Eat the Weeds. There are a number of blogs and channels dedicated to helping people understand which plants are safe to consume, which are toxic, and which have potential medicinal uses. I would advise anyone interested in eating or drinking wild plants or garden plants to do your homework. It's easy to think of these plants as natural and harmless, but I recall a comedian years ago who joked about his friends conflating good for you with natural. He said he'd consider that while drinking a hemlock smoothie. Hemlock, of course, being a plant known for its lethal effects and toxicity since antiquity. I have some plants in my garden that are said to be toxic that I have consumed in tea form, but I am very careful to keep the amount consumed as small and safe as possible. Additionally, I have some plants with medicinal value that are said to have health benefits, but that can cause issues if taken in high doses or taken by people with particular health issues. If you have known issues with your health, especially liver issues, I urge caution. Additionally, many edible plants can still contain certain components that can build up over time and cause gastrointestinal discomfort or illness. All things in moderation. I started to Google every plant or weed I encountered and was surprised that some common weeds can be cooked and eaten, or even eaten raw. One I encountered was spiderwort, which is a beautiful and delicate flower that comes out in spring in clusters at the end of long stalks that come from the poofy grassy plants that generally grow close to the ground. The name of the plant is lost to us. Some people think it's named for the way the flowers cluster at the top of the stalks that come out in spring, making the flowers resemble spiders. Others believe it's named after its medicinal use to treat painful bug bites, such as spider bites. The flowers range in shade, most often from pink to lavender, to deep purpley blue. And to me, they always herald the coming of the Easter holiday. Spiderwort made its way back to Europe from colonized land in 1629, where it was cultivated as a garden flower. But before that, indigenous people of the Americas had been using the plant for many medicinal and cultural purposes. As mentioned earlier, it was used topically to reduce pain from bug bites or inflammation, similar to aloe vera. In addition to being used for stomach issues, it is also said to have a laxative effect. At first, you may think it's not a good thing, but it can be useful if you're attempting to treat something like constipation, for example. When I Googled for information on spiderwort, I found that those stalks that appear in spring can be cut down to saute in butter and are said to taste a lot like asparagus. Some sites claim you can cook the leaves this way as well. I haven't tried it, and I'm not sure that I will, and I'll explain more about that in a bit. I also found a very fun-looking recipe for a spiderwort elixir, also referred to as spiderwort soda. The recipe takes a few days to complete, but consists of only flowers, honey, and water. Apparently, the interaction with the honey results in a carbonation-like effect, and people seem to like it. I'm wondering if it's possible to use other flowers to make the same sort of drink, and I may try that later with roses. So one morning I went out to collect some spiderwort flowers, and I was doing pretty well until I saw pollinators in the patch. That's when I felt guilty and decided not to collect any more. I figured the pollinators need them more than I do. So I collected the ones I already had, and I brought them inside to start cleaning and dehydrating them. This is why I probably will not be doing more with spiderwort flowers or stalks, although I may use the stalks after flowering is completed or try some of the recipes with leaves during the more dormant season. But after rinsing them off, I laid them out on a metal baking sheet. I also decided to do some rose petals. Roses have a sour taste, but not a bad one. It's similar to lime or lemon tartness. It actually reminds me of when I was a kid and I would sometimes eat clover, a sort of tangy flavor. And I decided to use a mix of my roses, the red, the pink, and the white blush. In addition to decorating our homes and looking pretty in fields or gardens, being food for pollinators or gifts for sweethearts, roses are edible. And not just edible. They're a good source of vitamin C, and believe it or not, a good source of other vitamins and minerals as well. There's also a sugar-coated rose petal recipe available, but I've never tried that one either. People have been consuming roses for a long time. The petals, rose hips, teas, desserts, salads, and rose water, which I also made and then froze in an ice cube tray for safekeeping. Roses are another plant that comes with a lot of medicinal claims. According to the paper Beneficial Medicinal Effects and Material Applications of Rose, published at PubMed, quote, the medical benefits of roses include the treatment of inflammation, diabetes, dysmenorrhea, depression, stress, seizures, and aging. Rose water is precious beauty water for the skin and has antibacterial effects on various microbiota. End quote. I want to be clear that I am not saying that these plants do all of the things people claim they can do. I'm just including their lore and history here because it's fascinating to me. Early pharmaceuticals were mainly plant-based, and certainly these plants can be quite powerful or even lethal. So I wouldn't be surprised to find that some of the physical effects they can facilitate are helpful. I'm just not qualified to confirm these claims. And again, my main advice is to tread lightly. Do your research and pace yourself rather than jumping in head first. Years ago, I had a large stackable dehydrator that I used to like quite a bit. But after some time, I used it less often and it fell by the wayside like so many gadgets that we lose interest in. Today, if I need to dehydrate, I use one of two methods, since I live in the very hot state of Texas in the US. I either turn the oven on low or I use the inside of my car. I actually prefer the car method because it uses the greenhouse setup of the inside of the vehicle and pure sunlight instead of extra energy that I'd have to pull from gas or electric using my home. When dehydrating in an oven on low, the temperature you shoot for is between 120 and 140 Fahrenheit. In Texas, on a hot day, the inside of a car hits right about these same temperatures. Actually, it can get even hotter, so you need to keep a watch. But in general, the inside of a car can be used as a dehydrator that works just as well as other methods. Plus, having it inside the vehicle keeps the bugs away if you're trying to use sun for drying. So I placed the petals on baking trays and set them on the front seat of my car and left them to dry out, which didn't take long because flower petals aren't that substantial. If you're doing something like vegetables or fruit, you might need more time, potentially more than one day, since you can't heat the car overnight. So anything that takes more hours than the good sunny parts of a normal day will require you to do more than one day. I also went out to check on things every couple hours and sometimes shuffled the petals around just to be sure they were drying evenly. To be clear, you don't have to dehydrate leaves or other plant parts if you want to make them into herbal teas or add them to your regular teas. I chose to dehydrate them in order to preserve them so that I could store them for later use. Once they're dried, you can crush or cut them into smaller pieces to make them easier to steep and strain. You can grind them into powders for other uses. I definitely would not use a powder when using a tea strainer, as it would just leave you with a muddy mess, since strainers are not intended to strain things as small as powders. The spiderwort alone makes a gorgeous purple tea, but it has a very earthy flavor that is more like a hearty vegetable broth than a tea. For me, it would definitely require some additives or might even be more of a supplement for other herbal teas. I often will add my flower or plant parts to my strainer based on what sounds appetizing to me. In this case, some of each of the rose and spiderwort that I dried. You can also mix this with store-bought tea bag contents or other herbs and spices you think would mix well. You know yourself and the flavors that you fancy, so choose what you love, put it in the strainer, and add some hot water to see how it blends. When dandelions are in season, I love adding some of those flowers as well. Those are another good nutritional source. This particular rose tea recipe is actually more like making rose water. I don't normally simmer my tea for 5 minutes until the color has left the leaves. I would add hot water and let it steep in the cup or the pot, depending on how much I'm using, a cup's worth or a pot's worth. But I would bring it to a boil and then shut it off and use it hot, not simmering, for 5 minutes. But feel free to try both. I'm not here to tell anyone how they like to take their tea. Here's an example of how I brew my herbal teas with plants from the garden. First, I fill my teapot with hot water from the tap to get it acclimated to the hotter water that will be going in from the stove. I let it sit full of the hot tap water until the water in the kettle gets hot. I also prepare my tea strainer by adding the dried petals. Here I have some roses, and also some spiderwort. I then empty the hot tap water out of the teapot and refill it with the hot water from the kettle. Then I wait for the flavors and colors to seep out into the water. I occasionally roll the strainer around to keep the water flowing through the device. After several minutes, you can see that it's significantly darker and ready to drink. As I sit with it and drink it, it will continue to darken and take on more colors while it continues to steep in the teapot. So be bold, be adventurous, but also be responsible and do your research. That's it for this episode. If you like the cottage content, then like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss an upload. And I'll see you around the cottage at Woodland Corners.